So we have Rabbi Yehuda who says that for, as we said before, that if a yochid does relies on the bezin since the you are potter, and we have the chachamim who say that since the bezin does not bring a korban, if it's only a minority who follow them, then you have to bring your korban. And we're trying to work out which chachamim are they. So we say as follows: the my rabbanon. What are the rabbanon? The Tanya will the Braise. Adayin ani oimer. I would say now. The pasuk we're going to use. There's two kinds of korban chatas what we're talking about here. One is if you did an aved on your own b'shegik, and one is when you rely on the bezin. And when you rely on the bezin, at least if the majority rely on the bezin will bring a par, a bull, and have everyone in mind. So you are potter. And the way Rabbi Yehuda learned is the chiddush is that even when the bezin does not bring a par, for example, minority only did it, still you are potter. So it comes along to this, it says here, the Bryce as follows. I would have thought, miyut kol shechotu chayav, and I would have thought, well, it makes sense that if the minority of the people committed a sin, b'shegig yechayiv she'ain bezin b'vin day in part. The bezin doesn't bring a par. Now, we're not sure what we're talking about here. Minority of people doing a shegig relying on the bezin, or even just any shegig, as we'll soon see. And the Rav Kol Shechotu, but I would have thought that the majority of the people sinned, Yehei Pturin. They should be exempt. Why? Should the Bezin Mevin Al Yidei Power? Because the Bezin will bring one. It says a passing May Amma Oretz. I don't care how many, how few. From the Amma Oretz, you have to bring a fil ruba, a fil kula. Even majority, even all of them, they have to bring a carbon. Now let's work this out. What are we talking about? The Mai. What are we talking about? Ilema, are we talking about Bishigas Maisa? Are we talking about an ordinary cardinal chatas that you brought because you made a mistake? You thought it was kosher fats, it was shuman, it turned out to be it was chaylev. So, so then, if l'chayda we're talking about that, where does the bezin come in? Bezdin maya vidataya. What do you tell me that here that a minority bezin doesn't bring a carbon majority? The two bezin doesn't bring any carbon when you did your own shagik. Shaloi Bahiras Bezdin Mimaisa. Bezdin wasn't involved. Why would Bezdin bring a carbon? What's the Braisa talking about? Shaloi Bahira, they didn't give Hayra. Ella Bahira must be talking. The Braisa talking about the Bezdin gave a Hayra. The Bezdin Paskin, so and so and so. So a minority we're going to say have to bring a carbon. And because the Bezdin won't bring the carbon on your behalf, and the majority will bring a carbon, and the majority we would have thought should not have to bring a carbon because the bezin will bring. And Kamashalon from the word mama is that even the majority have to bring their own carbon as well, as if to say the bezin brings a carbon, but so too in the majority each individual brings their own kizbu, or their sheep or their goat. That's what the Bride is saying. How can it be? Well, it says, "May ama odes b'shigas ma'isud see." It can't be that the Bryce is talking about a case where the Bezin ruled, when clearly the pasuk that we're bringing here, Ba'asais, is talking about you as an individual did something wrong without relying on the Bezin. So this is how I have to learn Pshat. Marry the two together. Elalav hochikam. This is what Bryce is saying here. If a miyud kosher chotu, if a minority of the people committed their own sin, they thought kosher fats was the treifa fats was kosher. There's no question that they have to bring their own carbon. You know why? Because even in the case where they're relying on the bezin, they have to bring their own carbon. This is the proof that we're going to bring. The Chacham hold that in a minority where the bezin doesn't bring the carbon, each individual has to bring one. So miyud kosher chotu b'shigas ma'isa chayavin. Why? Because even in the case where they're relying on the bezin, shem bezin they're chayiv. So therefore, there's no question a minority have to bring their own carbon if they ate treifa fats thinking it was kosher. Yochel, I would, you know why? Because they also bring a carbon even when they rely on a bezin. Yochel, I would have thought that this is what the Rai is saying. I would have thought the Rai Tzibur, if they would have followed the bezin, they don't bring a carbon. So maybe they don't have to bring a carbon even if they do their own chaton bezin. Maybe a Tzibur doesn't bring a carbon. Yachal, I would have thought that Rav Tzibur should also Bashigas Maisei Ptunish had a Bezdin Mevina Alei and Par Bahira. In a case where Bezdin would have paskin, they would be potter. So too, if they did on their own, also if it's a Tzibur, they're potter. Tamalei Mama Oretz, the one Afilu Rubai. So what is he clearly from here? But a minority, they do bring their own carbon. Argues with our Mishnah because the Bezdin is not bringing one on their behalf. Omar Papa questions that. How do you know? Maybe a minority, the bezin doesn't bring a carbon, but nor do they bring a carbon. And we're only querying about a majority. What's the raya that a minority, each one brings their own carbon in a case where bezin ruled? So it can't be, because then why is the Brisa only focusing on the majority about bringing the carbon? The Brisa should have first started off with the minority and say that even though minority were the Bezdin Paskins and there's no one bringing a carbon on their behalf, they are potter. Let's work out. But when they did their own Aveda, they should bring a carbon chatas. Talk about that first, and then work your way up to majority, where at least sometimes you take our potter. Work your way up. The fact that we don't discuss a minority, we don't discuss a majority, proves clearly a minority. There's no question they bring a karma chatas if they did an aveda, because even if they rely on a bezin to bring a karma chatas, our question is only regarding a majority. So this is the chacham who argue with our mission. Why are they only talking about in the case of majority committed? Let's say they ate shuman thinking that it was kosher fat to be chaylev. Lav Miklal must be the miyat bahira, but if a minority and they would have followed the bezin, then kaimlin mechayva, then clearly they're mechayv bahira. Because otherwise, if you're a papa right that they're also potted, like our Mishnah says, the beneder bereisha al miyut the mechayv b'shigas ma'is. It's the first focus on a minority that they're chayiv, the smaller chiddush, that or whatever. Start with the minority, where there's no, by in the case of Hira, that Potter, even though there's no Bezdin, there's nobody doing a carbon on their behalf. But if they did their own Aveda, they have to bring a carbon. Start with that, and then you work your way up the majority. Well, and then work your way majority, the Chayim. The Mechayim, because we don't focus on it at all. But then we focus only on the Roiv. Shmamina comes to proof from here that Miyad Bahira Chayavin. That if but a Miyad follow a bezin, they are chayiv kispa seida. Each individual has to bring their own carbon because the bezin is not bringing a carbon back. Ushaloi bahara, and if there's no following, b'shigas ma'isa chayavin. Clearly, so that's a chanim. Says the how do you know which? We have a Mishnah in the Brisa. I know who says what. Merdi tabayus mitana. The Mishnah is tam and the Brisa is tam. Is memayde kamaisa Rabbi Yehuda b'sais rabban. I know the first one or the two Brisas. I know the first one is. For example, the Brisa says you brought a Brisa im nefesh achas ba'aseisa, and you said what? That if you do Haros Bezin, an individual does Haros Bezin, you put. I know that's Rabbi Yehuda, and I know the Brisa. There's no names there; they're anonymous. I know the Kamaisa, the first Brisa Rabbi Yehuda, b'saisa, the second Brisa at the bottom. Maybe the other way around. So the Gemara, man shamlei dorish miyuta. Who's the one generally who focuses on a word that's a miyut high gavin in such a case? Rabbi Yehuda. Where do we find that? By carbon oila. Tanya Yehuda says. But Yehuda says, it says in the pasuk, these are the laws of an oila that it goes on the mizbeach, and we dashin that generally something goes on the mizbeach, even though it's possible, we let it stay in the mizbeach and don't take it off. But there are a few exceptions. For example, what happens is shechted by night. Zois, only these cases, but if you're shechted by night, or let's say instead of sprinkling on the walls, you poured it on the walls, or if you took the blood outside of the Beis Hamikdash, and all these cases, if you put them in Bech, they do come down. So he's the one who makes these diyukim in these lashon yachid. Therefore, we say the same thing here. Or another pshat is you know why it can't be Rabbi Yehuda? The Tani, it says in the Brisa, the first Brisa, Roiv Kol Shechatu, Bezin Medvina Day part of most of the people. It says there in the second Brisa, most of the people, the Roiv Kol, most of the majority of the community sinned, Bezin will bring a carbon on their behalf. Majority, now there's two possibilities. You have 12 Shvatim, and you have majority, and the total number of people. What happens? You have 7 Shvatim, but they turn out to be the minority. What happens then? It seems to me a Roiv Kol that has majority of people. But that's not the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said tzibur d'maisi and bezin light. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's the tzibur that brings and not the bezin that's not. We learned Rabbi Yehuda says shiva shvatim shechatu, 7 shvatim sin mevian zayin podim. Rabbi Yehuda holds that each shevet is called a kol. And they bring it, and not the bezin. Here you say that the Rav Kol brings it. Most of the community brings it, and the bezin is the one who brings it. You know, actually, it's the people who bring it. So it can't be Rabbi Yehuda the second, but Isa must be the first Brisa. It says further. So that's one explanation. Nachman Mishmol, so that was Rabbi Yehuda Mishmol. Nachman Mishmol also that the Mishnah is not according to everybody, but who argues with our Mishnah, who says that each individual has to bring a carbon is not the Rabbi Yehuda Chamim, but Rameya and Chamim. What's the story there? Rav Nachman on Mishmol. Rav Nachman says the name Mishmol. Zudi Rameir. But the Chachamim say that Yachid she'asa b'Horayos Bezin chayiv. The Chachamim say that they chayiv. Which is Rameir? Who's the Rameir? They might have made about it. The time we learned. What happened? Bezin Paskin, and they did it. Doesn't say who's a they. Majority, minority. Doesn't say. Is a mayor says Potter, and the Chum say chayiv. Let's understand. Man also, who did it, and who did it here? Elaim Bezdin, the Bezdin did it, that the Bezdin are only ones and nobody else followed their verdict, their psak, only the Bezdin. My time in the Ban Chai, why did I want to say that Chai? By the time you learned, Yochel Hoyde Bezdin, also Bezdin, Yochel Chayav, and I would have thought that they should be Chai. Tamaloim at Hakol V'asu. Maisa Tolo Bekol V'harot Tlu Bezdin. That the people have to do it. And the Bezdin is the one who paskins. That they paskin, they made the mistake. But the people are the ones that have to do it. And if nobody follows, then doesn't have the psak. Elohim Bezin were also Rav Kahol. So must be talking about that. What the also Bezin Paskin, and majority of the people did it. Well, if it's talking about the majority of the people, why would Rameir say the Bezin is potter? Might haven't made a potter. Why would he say potter? And Allah is talking about Hoyru Bezin also Miyat. Talking about the Bezin Paskin, only minority of the people did it. Okay, and that's a machlekes. Marsov Yochel were Bezin potter. That what Rameir holds that you potter like our Mishnah. Marsov Chum hold Yochel were Bezin Chayif. If Bezin are bringing it, then you have to bring it yourself. Your Chayif. Papa said again, no raya. Maybe there's no such thing. How do you know that when he says Potter is talking about a minority who did it? Maybe everyone agrees. And the Chum agree that minority people did it, even though the Bezin won't bring it their Potter. And the Bezin Mashal Tzibin knows what's talking about here. Those case all together, like we mentioned before, that there was half and half. And if you add the bezin to the half, you'll have a majority. One opinion hold bezin mashlim leroy tzibur. One opinion hold that bezin adds to the number, and therefore you have a majority over here, and the bezin bring a carbon. And Masav, it ain't bezin mashlim. The bezin don't count. They don't count. Or you boy say more. Concluding the Gemara here, Hoyle bezin vasu rubish will call bezin paskin, and the majority of people did it. So what's the issue? Uman chachamim Rab Shimon. It's a chacham Rab Shimon, the Amma who says. Sibur Maisi u Bezin Maisi. Shimon holds that they both bring. Where Ameir says Potter, he meant to a majority of people. When he said Potter, he meant that the Bezin is Chayiv, but the majority of the people are Potter. And the Chacham will argue is Rav Shimon. He says that they're both Chayiv. The Bezin Chayiv for passing wrong, and the people are Chayiv because they actually did the Aveda. Or we're talking about that the individual Shavit, their own bezin, not the Sanhedrin that we said before in the Lishchot HaGozes, but their own bezin made the ruling and paskin wrong. And the question is, what happens here? Man Chacham Rabbi Yehudi, and the Chacham here is Rabbi Yehuda who argues Rameir. Rameir says, "Potter." The Tanya learned Shavit was bezdina, Oisa Shavit Chay. That Shavit Chay. That's the view of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rameir says Potter. That's what he's talking about. One Shavit, and they're following their own bezin. Or he buys him what happens 6 Shvatim sin, but they're the majority of the people, or Shiva 7 Shvatim Umasnis and Mani, who's the author of our Mishnah, is Rab Shimon ben Elazar, that says that's considered, the Tanya Shimon Elazar says, if 6 Shvatim, half, but they're the majority of people, or Shiva 7 Shvatim, Chayavim, they are Chayiv. And the other opinion says that you are Potter. So we'll stop over here. We'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah.